So I'm Greg Pankhurst. I'm the chairman of Queensland Live Exporters Association. I'm also on the ALEC board now, so the Australian Live Exporters Council. I'm also a shareholder in Frontier International, which is a live exporter, and I'm a consultant to a number of feedlots in Indonesia. So I'm heavily focused on live export.
Yeah, clearly. Greg, you've been around this industry for a long time. We're here as part of the Australian Brahman Breeders Association conference. What role, and it seems a bit of a layman's terms, but what role do Brahmans play in the live export industry?
Yeah, Brahmans are the breed of choice, I suppose. It wouldn't be giving them too many stars, but look, they have, for my time in Indonesia, nearly 35 years now, Brahmans have always been the breed of choice. They handle the conditions, they yield well, they're the feedlotter's favourite. So look, at the end of the day, if we can buy a Brahman and supply a Brahman to the live export trade, usually the importers are very happy.
What kind of breeding qualities or traits should producers be focused on in the modern market?
Look, obviously the breed has changed a lot in the last 35 years, and so we've seen better carcass yields coming from them. The butcher in Indonesia doesn't want fat, so a lean animal is the focus. The meat yield, meat colour, just the general traits that produce, you get meat off a bone. They're the general traits that the butcher wants.
When we're here in the territory as part of this conference, and they traditionally have a bit of a different kind of Brahman market. What do you see the opportunities for this area of the world in terms of live export?
Definitely the opportunities continue to supply feeder animals to Indonesia. So that typical 350 kilogram feeder animal, and I suppose the way I look at it a lot of ways is there's 280 million people in Indonesia. They're a 4-day trip on a boat away, so they're very, very, very close. And so I look at it, currently Indonesians eat 2.7 kilograms of beef per person per year. It's not very much. We eat 28 kilograms usually. But again, there's 280 million of them up there, so there's 1/10 of the population down here. So I just look at it and say, well, let's try and put an extra 100 grams per person per year. That's 100 grams per person per year, or a meat patty into them. And Australia would need to supply another 160,000 head of cattle to fulfil that 100 grams per person per year.
It's such a visual analogy. I love that. It's such a small change to a diet, seemingly, and it's such a big impact. Do you think the Australian market is a place to be able to supply that?
Well, that would be very challenging, obviously, because Australia has so many other markets it loves to supply as well, and it's capable of supplying. And so, obviously, it will be all focused on price. So as price creeps up and demand for our meat goes to other countries, and we see today China's still very strong, and America's very strong, and we've got some markets into the EU now. So obviously there will be a lot of meat go to there. So the Indonesians will have to keep up with the price to take the cattle, yes.
It's still an opportunity. There are a lot of challenges, I guess, in the industry at the moment, and we've seen them play out in various forms, whether it be the media or through governments or regulation and those sort of things over the years. What would be the main challenge that you see on the horizon at the moment for the industry?
I think social licence. Industry really needs to step up. Producers need to take a little bit of an interest in what's happening. We've seen the sheep situation, so the banning of the sheep trade to the Middle East, which has been a very long-term industry and underwent a lot of changes in the last 10 years to get it to a position where mortalities were extremely low, but unfortunately we're going to see it phased out in May 2028. Look, the federal government have been quite clear that they won't touch cattle, but I still think we need to be on the forefoot and on the forefront to make sure that they stick to their word, because producers are the ones that will lose. They've got the big assets, and it will be very sad to have to front up to Indonesia and say, look, sorry, we're unable to supply meat to you. And hopefully the Australian government, in their diplomatic and political aspirations, won't ever have to go to Indonesia and say that.
No, it would be absolutely devastating for a number of reasons. During your presentation today, you made a very strong point around communication and understanding the Indonesian market a little bit better, not just by producers but by our consumers and our general population too. Can you just talk a little bit more about that importance of understanding that market?
Yeah, so again, you look at that 280 million people. It's a huge market, but even they only eat 2.7 kilograms per person per year, and Australia provides probably about 30% of that. So there's meat comes from local cattle, there's meat comes from India, and Indian buffalo meat, which is a frozen product. Still quite a lot of Australian box beef go to Indonesia as well. So look, we really need to get our producers here. Get their head around what's actually happening in Indonesia. So what's happening up there is magnificent. The feedlots are great. The processing facilities are great. It feeds so many people, which is just so important.
What about the animal welfare side of it? You know, as you said, it's a 4-day trip on the boat over there, but a lot goes into that. It's very well managed and regulated by governments. You know, how important is understanding that process and the staffing around it?
So in 2011 we saw the implementation of SCASH, so the Export Supply Chain Accreditation System, which is run totally by the exporter. So from loads onto the ship in Australia and the time the animal is actually processed in Indonesia, it's the responsibility of the exporter. So the exporter holds full responsibility for the traceability of that animal as well as for the processing of the animal at the end of the day. So there's a huge amount of oversight from the exporter, and that comes with a cost. It comes with a large cost, and we really need for exporters, for producers, to understand how that all works, so that they feel comfortable selling animals over, and then they still feel comfortable. They can then go and talk to other people. So if you're sitting next to someone on a plane, or you're taking your kids back to school and you're at a school gathering in Sydney or Brisbane or Adelaide or wherever it may be, sit down with those parents that mightn't be exposed to the agriculture community and tell them what a great job you're doing and how much it's appreciated in the countries that we export to.
I think it's the taxi cab conversations, I guess, is what you're leaning towards too. And when you can put a face to it or humanise it a bit, it's the easier conversations or more memorable.
Yeah, more memorable. You know, I met Joe and he sat next to me at lunch where it was, and they have cattle and they've seen what happens in country, and they've sat down and talked to those feedlot workers. You know, the feedlot industry in Indonesia imports about 600,000 head of cattle a year, and that alone would support directly probably about 150,000 families. So just the employment in itself is a huge amount of employment for Indonesia.
You mentioned, the breeding a little bit there. You mentioned also in your presentation we were exporting 6,000 breeders a year as well. So what potential does that market have for Brahman breeders?
So Indonesia has a requirement that 3% of the feedlot capacity has to be imported by the feedlotter. So there's about 200,000 head of capacity in Indonesia. So yeah, there will be 6,000 head of breeding cattle go to Indonesia just for the feedlot sector. So they'll go into breed lots in Indonesia to produce a calf. Indonesia, we may have seen in the media at the moment, Indonesia's got big aspirations and desires to improve its own herd. It has a herd of about 11 million cattle itself, but they are very keen to obviously food security and sovereignty is very important to a country like Indonesia, so they are quite keen to look at importing breeding cattle themselves. That will be a challenge, and from the Australian side we need to help them, especially with things like nutrition and welfare and husbandry and the such. Yeah.
While on this tour, we've seen a few of the facilities here in the Territory where there's been a significant infrastructure spend, which I guess goes to show the confidence in the market. I imagine the same is for Queensland. What is the confidence that you see in this market going forward?
Oh yeah, so we've seen a number of registered premises pop up here in the NT over the last few years, and look, they've added to the capacity to export cattle out of the top end. There's also some new and newly approved facilities in Queensland as well. So there's been a lot of money put in on those facilities. We shouldn't forget the vessels that take the animals to Indonesia. There's been a huge investment in them in the last 10 years. So the owners of those vessels are keen to see the business continue, and then the other side is the producer. There's been a huge investment in properties, just in soil to produce the product, and then the infrastructure to move the animals from the property to the ports.
And just finally, Greg, you've been in this industry for ages. It's a passion project. I was going to ask you what gets you out of bed in the morning, but at the moment it doesn't even seem that you're in one. So you're travelling around so much. But what keeps you going, and what keeps you passionate and excited about this industry?
Oh, I suppose I'm probably more Indonesian than I am Australian. So I've had, I'm nearly 60 and I've had 33 years. So I am, more time in Indonesia than I have in Australia. I've got some great friends and great colleagues, and I've got staff that have been with me for 33 years in Indonesia, which is lovely to see. I remembered one of my longest term staff. I interviewed him in 1992. He came in, he rode the push bike in for the interview. He had no shoes on, and I gave him a job. And I spend 2 or 3 days with him every 10 days. At the feedlot. He's now a feedlot manager. He travels to Australia quite often. He's got a family, got a house, got grandkids. They're the nice things that I know that can happen anywhere in the world, but I just like seeing people make a success of it, and they're the hard working. If you're a hard worker, I love to see that, and I love to join in the hard work as well. And we saw Callum McLaughlin today talk about succession planning. I hope one of my sons is going to go to Indonesia in the next few months to give it a crack over there too, and that'd make me extremely proud to have a boy go to Indonesia. He grew up there. He didn't grow up there full time, but he understands Indonesia. So that'd be great to see that happen too.
Well, all the best with that, because that does sound more like a passion project. Or not a passion project, but an ongoing.
It's an ongoing. So I'll have to keep going back as long as he sticks with it. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Greg.
Thank you.